Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is Shawna Gore. She is one of the senior editors at Lion Forge Comics. Shawna, welcome to Comic Culture.
Thanks for having me, Terrence.
So, Lion Forge is a relatively new comic imprint. I was wondering if you could tell me about Lion Forge, their mission, and the three separate imprints that you have.
So Lion Forge was started in 2011 by a small group of guys led by our owner, Dave Stewart II. And for the first many years, they focused on mostly publishing digital comics. You know, this was sort of an investment company at first for Dave. I think he wanted to see how the comics industry functioned and what it was like to invest in the creation of comics and the acquisition of licenses. And so he did that with a group of knowledgeable insiders who helped him form this company. And they did a variety of comics that were published mainly online, digitally, for the last few years. You might recall seeing some of the early titles that Lion Forge published online were some NBC licenses like Miami Vice and Saved by the Bell. And they were fun comics. They hired great talent for them. And then eventually they realized that, yes, this was an industry they wanted to stick with, and they wanted to invest more in it and see if they could expand. And so last year, Lion Forge went to print comics, and they started expanding the company and trying to grow the editorial department, which you've seen a lot of this year. Lion Forge has grown vastly in the last year, 6 months to a year. And it's a really interesting company. Our mission is to make comics that are inclusive and representative to all readers. Historically, you probably know that comics has largely been both a male-dominated industry and largely one that is run by white people. Certainly not a lot of people of color have been represented either in the material that comes out of the industry or the people who make comics. Even though, both women and people of color and queer people, they've all been a part of the industry for years and years and years, but they haven't had a lot of visibility. And so one of Lion Forge's key missions is to make sure that comics are being published that can be enjoyed by everyone, and that people see themselves in. When you see a Lion Forge comic on the bookshelf at your comic shop, there's a good chance that it has a more diverse cast of characters and probably more diverse creators than you might see coming from other publishers.
And you have books that appeal to readers of various ages. I think it's kind of interesting because you seem to want to reach readers when they're preteens, and then something for the young reader market, and then something for the more sophisticated comic readers. So can you tell us a little bit about how you might choose projects for those imprints?
The various imprints we have, and this is something that we look at all the time to see, is there a way we can help our readers find the comics that they really, really want? So right now, I hope I get all these numbers right, Lion Forge has a number of different lines, and we also have different imprints or groups of books, so it can be a little confusing. But we have the main line, which is for all ages, mature readers to kids, is called Lion Forge. Those are typically more for mature readers. And then we have age-divided groups. The youngest one is called Cub House, and it's for the youngest readers up to age 6. And then the next level up is called Caracal, and Caracal is for middle readers. And then the next imprint up is sort of our teen YA line, which is called Roar. Everything else that doesn't fit into specifically one of those categories usually gets put under the moniker of just Lion Forge. And within each of those lines, we have different kinds of books, and our superhero universe is called Catalyst Prime, and we have most of those titles fall under Lion Forge, but we're starting to diversify a little bit, and we're beginning to plan for some of those books to be published under Roar to be more specifically aimed at teen and YA readers.
And as a senior editor, what do you do in, I guess, the day-to-day operations to get the comics out and to get them into people's hands?
Oh boy. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into editing a comic. It's one of those things that people are always surprised to hear that it's a job that even exists, you know. So my daily role is usually involves checking in with the creators, making sure that everybody is keeping their schedule and doing the work that they've been contracted to do. Um, you know, when I first started working at Lion Forge, I inherited three titles. Two of them are part of the Catalyst Prime line, and then one is one of the teen books in the Roar line. And so I get scripts for these series. I read through the scripts, assign the work to pencilers, inkers, colorists, letterers. When we get pencils in, I have to check them against the script to make sure that the images that we're seeing on the page do a good job of the storytelling that the script calls for, and that the images line up, everything matches, the characters are consistent from panel to panel, all that sort of thing. And then you just sort of traffic the work between the various jobs that are done. So once I get the pencils in, we send it to the inker. Once we get the inks in, we send it to the colorist and the letterer. So it's sort of, it's a combination of trafficking, coordination between various people, and then also doing the proofreading and the visual editing that is required. And then another big part of my job, and for all editors, is looking for new talent and acquisitions for the company. So I'm always on the lookout for interesting projects or new creators, people who might want to join Lion Forge or bring their projects to us. So I would say I spend, it's probably about half my time working on projects that I already have, that are on my schedule, and trying to keep them going and keep them on time. And the other half is spent reading submissions and pitches and talking to creators and trying to hire people for projects and that sort of thing.
So a lot of us think of the editor as someone like maybe Stan Lee, who's always overseeing continuity and trying to make sure that what one writer writes fits into the universe and everything else. So is Lion Forge thinking in terms of how it fits into the overall universe, or is it something where the book is on its own, it stands on its own, and the editor, just like you're saying, is looking at making sure the pencils look right and making sure that there's everything spelled correctly and the balloon placement and whatnot?
It definitely depends on the title, but we do have the Catalyst Prime universe that I mentioned earlier is our superhero universe, and there are crossover events that happen. The very basic basis of the Catalyst Prime universe is that it is set in the real world, but that there was a major event that happened roughly 6 months before the books start, and it's a complicated story, but it's effectively like a meteor hitting the Earth, and then that event gives certain people on the planet powers. And there are, I think we have 7 different titles in the CP universe right now. It's hard to know exactly because we have some that are starting up next year, and we have a larger event that's going to be happening next year, which is what Gail Simone was hired to do for us recently. So yeah, there is a lot of continuity and making sure that, if something happens in one of my titles, like Noble or Excel, we can't have things happening in those books that don't align with what's happening in Kino or Astonisher or one of the other titles where the continuity is supposed to be, continuous, and it's supposed to meet up with the logic of how the other books are put together and what's happening. So yeah, there is a lot of continuity to keep track of on those titles specifically, but otherwise, for the most part, if it's a creator-owned book or even another licensed title, we're really looking within the logic of that series itself to make sure that, one of the other titles I edit right now is called Dinosaurs, and it's a licensed title that's based on a 90s cartoon that some of us might remember. And I'm working with the guy who created that original series, and he's also the writer of the comic. He is really the person that I defer to when it comes to, does this make sense in the Dinosaurs universe? He's the creator. He knows better than anyone. But I do have to make sure that the characters are consistent from panel to panel, and if if a character is named something in the first issue, that the name is spelled correctly through the following issues, and the character looks the same and has the same attributes. So, so it's really a mix. The continuity mostly comes in the superhero universe Catalyst Prime.
I've heard one of the most difficult parts of being an editor is sometimes books are running a little bit behind. Maybe you have to give a prompt to an artist to get him or her to speed up their process. So let's say I'm an artist and I'm getting very close to the deadline. How would you approach me to maybe make sure that I'm going to deliver the book on time so the book can be published and in stores?
Yeah, I mean, it really varies from artist to artist. These are a series of relationships, and I think I will say one of my favorite things about Lion Forge is that more than most publishers that I've worked with, they seem to understand that relationships are really, really important. And it's not simply a matter of being heavy-handed and picking up the phone and screaming at people to turn in their work on time. A lot of it is working far enough in advance with your artists so that if something happens, you're not caught unaware, and that there is time to do some triage and make sure it happens. And for instance, there is I mentioned Dinosaurs earlier. We recently hired a couple of other inkers to join that project when it started falling a little bit behind schedule. One of our creators on the project was dealing with some medical issues, and it was unavoidable. That stuff happens to everybody. And, I worked with him to make some decisions, like, this should be your book, but you need some help. What are we going to do to make sure we hit the deadline? And he was able to recommend to me a couple of his friends who were inkers who he thought could do good work on his art. And so it was a series of negotiations, like, okay, this is what we need to do. Let's bring a couple of people on, and it's keeping the book on track. We're not going to fall off the schedule. It's not going to be late. But it's a lot of triage in the last couple of weeks leading up. You see that we're sending this book to print on October 12th, and here we are in early September, and I don't think we're going to make it. So, the key is really to work far enough ahead where there is time to implement an emergency plan if you have to. But it's always something with comics. There's always somebody has a baby, somebody gets sick, grandparents die, all sorts of things happen, and it's a better industry when you can support your creators and help them through their difficult times instead of simply sort of being the iron fist that says, you're fired, I'll hire somebody else to do your job, because it's going to happen to everybody at some point.
Now, you mentioned that you try and work as far ahead as possible, and I'm wondering, I spoke with Eric Larson last year, and he said sometimes, the book will come back from the colorist on a Wednesday, and then that next week it's in the stores. So I'm wondering, yep. Is that sort of how you're operating?
We try to work farther ahead than that, but, again, the title I'm thinking about where we hired these additional inkers, we're sending a book to press next week that has not been lettered, and it is not completely colored. The inks will be finished on Sunday. And, but the key is to sort of stagger everything. So the final inks for this issue are coming in on Sunday from the inker, but he started turning pages in almost a month ago. So the key is once those inked pages start coming in, you start feeding those to the colorist, and he can get started on them as he has time. So by the time we're at this stage where it's the last few pages we're waiting on, most of the issue has been colored. It sounds really nerve-wracking and nail-biting, and it is. But it's just a matter of keeping in contact. So, it's usually not a day goes by that I haven't checked in with somebody on the team to make sure, okay, you're doing this. Yesterday it was the letterer, and I had to make sure you have everything you need. He doesn't have all the colors, obviously, but he does have the inked pages that he needs. And in the cases where he doesn't have the inked pages, he has the penciled pages to work from. So it really is sort of like an octopus. You're looking at all these different arms and how to keep them all coordinated with each other to make sure that once this guy is done, it moves on to this person. So it can be an exhausting job. Luckily, the subject matter is usually fun, and the fact that you're making comics and working in publishing, those are, really fun things. I'm lucky to have the job I do. But it does get very hectic sometimes and very nerve-wracking when you're looking at a publisher and they're emailing you saying, we want these files, it would be great if we had them tomorrow, and you still don't have a final proof. But it happens, and we pull things off that are sort of magical sometimes.
I think of the old Marvel bullpen bulletins where you'd read about the office setting, where
Uh-huh.
there's the art director and there's this person and that person, and maybe if somebody's running late on a book, they'll send it to the crusty bunkers who are going to go ahead and they'll all get a page and ink it in a day.
Yeah.
So is Lion Forge something where there's that kind of bullpen, or is it the modern office where people are sort of able to telecommute and send the stuff off digitally and might not be in one geographic spot?
It's very much a modern office. I am sitting here, this is my living room in Portland, Oregon. I'm one of two Lion Forge staffers who lives and works from Portland. Our publicist is also based here, and coincidentally, he and I both used to work at Dark Horse many years ago together, and it was partly through him that I was connected to this job. Um, but yeah, one of the other senior editors is based in LA. Another one lives in New York. We have an editor who lives in Florida. This is made possible by the fact that there's excellent technology to support us. So we all hang out on, we use Microsoft, and there's some software called Teams. It's like hanging out on Skype with somebody. So even though I'm alone at my house in Portland working all day, if I need to get a hold of any of the other editors to ask them a question, it's just, I type a question into Teams and they get right back to me. So we are able to have that sort of coworker camaraderie that is really important when you do work like this. And the other thing that helps is that the main office is based in St. Louis. And Lion Forge is really wonderful about bringing everybody out to St. Louis every few months. So not this coming week, but next week, we have an editor summit in St. Louis. So everybody who works remotely will be flown to St. Louis, and we'll hang out for a few days at a conference center, and we'll have meetings to talk about, editorial processes and just any kind of information we really need to share with each other. And it gives us a chance to, hang out and get meals together and, be friendly in the way that you hope that coworkers would be friendly. So it's sort of the best of both worlds. It would have been really difficult for me to relocate to St. Louis to take this job because I have a family based here in Portland, and it's hard to uproot your family and move across country. But this makes it possible for me to, I can work from home, and I get to take my 5-year-old son to kindergarten and pick him up every day just by taking little breaks. And then I make up for it by working slightly longer hours in the evening, you know. So it's not quite like being a freelancer. It's very much, I am on the staff and working a 40-hour plus week, but the structure of it is a little bit looser than if I had to report to an office every day.
That's kind of interesting to hear how that dynamic has changed and how technology's allowing a company in St. Louis to hire the best from around the country.
I think that's one of the keys to the success that Lion Forge has seen recently is they've been able to sort of do, it's sort of a corny phrase, the out of the box thinking, but it really is more than any other publisher. I think Lion Forge is doing some remarkable things, both with the people they're hiring and the way we approach books and acquisitions. All of it is a little bit unusual for the comics industry.
You were talking about submissions, and that's also something that's unusual. I know that I believe the policy at Marvel and DC is that they don't accept submissions unless they're inviting you to make a pitch. So it seems that Lion Forge is actually looking for people to come and give them ideas and then perhaps set up meetings to see where it goes. Is that the case?
Lion Forge has a submissions portal on our website, and you can go to lionforge.com and click on submissions and read the information about how to submit one of your ideas or a pitch for publication. And the same was true at Dark Horse. I'm not really up on what other companies are doing. I think for a while at one point Oni had open submissions, but I don't know if they do anymore. Most submissions do come from relationships, pre-existing relationships with creators that you know and whose work you admire, people won't miss deadlines and that kind of thing. So sometimes, it's definitely the case that when I got my job at Lion Forge, I started calling my friends and the people, and it's not a matter of personal favors like my friends that I want to get into the industry. These are people that I've had really working relationships with for a long time, whose work I admire and who I think would be a great fit for Lion Forge. So, I called everybody I knew who I wanted to work with, and I said, do you have anything that you think would be a good fit for Lion Forge? Please send it my way. And I'm happy to say, I have a handful of those projects that are currently in development. They're not contracted yet, but I'm hoping there will be some things out in the next couple of years that are the result of the long relationships I've had working in comics.
Let's just say, I'm somebody, I'm working on a comic, and I think it's the best thing ever. How would I go about putting together a pitch that's going to make sense to a publisher? What sort of things should I include in that, so that way I'm not wasting your time or my time?
The formal structure of a pitch doesn't tend to matter that much. There are some people who really want to see, and I don't know if this is truly the case, but you might hear somebody say everything has to be double spaced, and it's, the specs of the document itself are really important. I don't care about that stuff. What you need to know is, can you get an idea across on paper? Can you write in such a way that your ideas are transmitted effectively? So usually what I ask people for is a synopsis of the overall story. Can you summarize this original graphic novel idea you have in a couple of pages or less? Because again, that gives the idea that as the writer, you have a clarity of vision for this project. You understand the story you're trying to tell. The kind of pitch that I hate to see is sort of a teaser where it's, you get some information about the book and they sort of detail some of the plot, but there's a difference between plot and story, and if all you see in an interview, or if all you see in a pitch is a plot, that's usually not a very good indication of the depth of the story that will be told. And the other thing you really need to do is give it away. You have to tell what the story is. There's nothing more maddening to an editor, I think, than getting a pitch where they say, it ends with, and what happens next will shock you. Like, I can't do anything with that because I have no idea what the hell it is you're talking about. And if it may be a very silly idea that won't work, or it could be a great idea, but unless you tell the editor that you're pitching to the mechanics of the story and exactly what happens, they're not going to be able to say yes to working with you.
Speaking of the mechanics, so if I'm pitching and I have an idea, maybe I think it's a little rough, is that something that you would say, oh, here's a way that you could fix it, or are you looking for things that are polished enough right now that you just have to give it a little bit more polish and it can go to publishing, or are you looking for something that you can help develop and bring along through the process?
It really depends, creator to creator. First and foremost, I have to do my job for my company, which means I'm not looking to spend all of the money they're paying me to help somebody develop a pitch that they might take to somebody else, or so it really depends on the situation. One of the creators that I'm currently working with on developing a pitch right now, he is a creator that I have a previous relationship with. We've done work together before. He's done work for other publishers. And so he's the kind of guy that I said, give me a list of books you want to do. They were not fully fleshed out. They were just little blurbs. But he has a proven track record as both a writer and an artist, so that if he comes to me with a 2-line pitch, this is about, whatever it is, but it's not fully fleshed out, I know that I can work with somebody like that to flesh it out. And that's exactly what we did. So, this creator that I really wanted to work with, who I first worked with at Dark Horse, and then had, he has also done some work for Scholastic and a number of other publishers. He's proven himself. He's an amazing writer and artist. I said, just give me your ideas. And he gave me a list of like 6 ideas. And then we went through and I picked the one that I thought would be the best fit for my interests at Lion Forge and for what Lion Forge is looking to do within the comic book marketplace. And then I worked with him to develop that into a fuller pitch. And then that is what we got through the acquisitions process and we're currently in contract negotiations with. So it really depends, but you can't expect an editor to do that for anybody, any random person that they might meet at a convention, because that kind of thing is very time consuming. And it's hard for an editor to know if somebody that they just meet for 5 minutes at a convention is going to have the kind of follow through that I know other professional creators I have worked with would have.
Yeah, I think a lot of people tend to think of it as it's my project, it's my passion, but not necessarily this is my profession. And I think that's something that you're telling the audience that this is something that we need to think about as well.
For sure. Another thing that I like to tell people, sometimes we get pitches from people who are not working professionals in the comics industry. They might be illustrators or designers. They might be pretty good at drawing when it comes down to it. But that there's a big difference between being somebody who illustrates even professionally and doing sequential storytelling, page after page after page, month after month. It is exhausting work. And a lot of people, even working artists who do illustration for a living don't understand how grueling and how physically demanding it can be to draw comics, and how careful you need to be with sequential storytelling to make sure you get all of the key elements in place. So so in a lot of those cases, part of my job is to impart to people exactly what it is they're trying to do. And if they have this one story they've been wanting to tell for 20 years, and they have the original pitch that they did 20 years ago, but they haven't done anything on it, I ask them, well, what do you want me to do that you can't do? If you're an artist and this is your big idea and you've had it for 20 years, why don't you have a comic? You need to take the time, develop the story, sit down and draw it yourself, and show that to me instead of saying, I compare it a lot to people who might want to be musicians. And there, might be some, a person with a guitar who says, like, I really want to write these songs. I have these ideas. Here's my list of song titles, and here's my guitar. Hire me, tell me you're going to make my record, and then I'll write these songs. That is not how you do it. You just go ahead, you write the songs, you perform them, you find a way to record them, and then you show those around. And comics is really similar. If you're an aspiring artist and you have a comic book that you want to make, sit down and make it. Well, and it doesn't, it may not be perfect. You may want to hire an editor to help you with it. But, if you're not dedicated to your own art enough to sit down and produce the work, it's unlikely you're going to get somebody to pay you to do it.
Well, Shawna, I'm going to have to stop us there. They're telling us that we're out of time. I'd like to thank you so much for taking time out of your day today. I'd like to thank you at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon.